you doing, everybody? And welcome to NinjaToons, where the martial arts meets the creative arts. I'm Michael Voog, the Art Ninja, coming to you from my studio in the Simi Valley Town Center. As the Art Ninja, my job is to educate, motivate, and appreciate you, the parents and students that make up our creative community. Through my speed drawing videos, step-by-step drawing tutorials, and weekly local classes, my mission and passion is to inspire your artistic improvement through these lessons. So join me in this next lesson of how to draw Rexzilla. Now, before we get started on our drawing, there's 5 things that we want to remember before we get to drawing. The first thing we want to do is stretch. It's important to not develop bad habits. So before we start drawing, we want to make sure that we get up, stretch a little bit, so that we don't have aches and pains, because we can get caught up in our drawing, and sometimes we'll forget to stretch, and that can cause injuries. So step number 1 is stretch. Step number 2 is think. We want to think before we start drawing. Think about what it is we're actually going to be drawing. So today we're going to draw Rexzilla. What is Rexzilla? It's a combination of Rex from Toy Story and Godzilla. It's a cool little fusion that I put together that you'll see here in this drawing tutorial. So think about Rex. Think about his colors, his size, his shape. Think about his head size compared to his arms and his legs. How big is his tail? Now take a moment to think about Godzilla. How is he different than Rex? He has a smaller head, bigger arms, bigger legs, and his overall design is a little bit different. But get those 2 pictures in your mind so that as we go through this drawing tutorial, you'll see the direction that we're headed. Step number 3, sketch. We want to make sure that when we're drawing on our paper that we sketch lightly and loosely. We're sketching, we're not carving. So don't press too hard on the paper. We want to make sure that our sketches are light and easy to go over so that we don't get confused with darker lines from the very beginning of the drawing. Step number 4, cleanup or inking. After we've done our initial sketch and we get the drawing exactly the way we want it, the next step is to clean up our drawing using a number 2 pencil or an ink marker. Simply all we're doing is tracing our finished drawing that we did in step number 3, which was our sketch phase. And step number 5 is color. So take your time with this. Have fun coloring. Color your character however you like. But just remember to take as much care in coloring as you did with your sketching and with your cleanup. All right, so let's get started drawing. We've already done our stretching and we've done our thinking. Now let's do some drawing. Now with Rexzilla, I always like to give myself a creative challenge. So Rex starts with the letter R. So we're going to start drawing this character with the letter R. And as we draw this, remember, sketch lightly on your paper. Okay, we're going to start drawing this letter R in the upper left corner of the paper. As you see in the drawing in front of you, this letter R is in the upper left corner, and it's a modified R. So it doesn't look like the R's that you would write at school. This is somewhat modified to create this pose for Rexzilla. Okay, after we draw the letter R, we're going to draw Rex's belly. So we're going to use an oval shape to draw Rex's belly. And you see that this oval lines up right underneath the letter R. The next step is drawing his thigh. So we're going to draw a smaller oval inside the oval we just created for his belly. And an important rule in symmetry in drawing is that what you do to one side, you want to do to the other. So now that we've drawn the first oval on that thigh that's closest to us, we're going to use a C curve to draw just the edge of his thigh on the back of Rexzilla. The next step is we're going to use simple shapes, as we do with all of our drawings, to create Rexzilla. So we're going to draw his back foot first. We're going to use a simple triangle, and notice that the triangle lines up underneath that back thigh. And now we're going to draw his front foot. Now it's important when we're doing these drawings, I create all these drawing tutorials from scratch. So it's really important that when I'm creating a pose for you to copy in these step-by-step lessons, that it's a unique pose. It's not static and completely symmetrical. You can get that in other drawing lessons. These ones I want to have dynamic animated poses for you to copy to bring life to your drawings. So when we're drawing this, this front foot, I want you to use a cone-shaped cone shape to draw his front foot. Now notice I'm using 2 straight lines on each side of the cone, and then I'm going to use a C curve on the bottom. And that's going to create our cone shape. Okay. Now that we have the top of Rexzilla and the bottom, now we're going to start adding some details. This is important to establish the top and bottom of your character so you know that it fits on the paper. Okay, if we start just at the top and work our way down, too many times we run out of space and we end up squashing our drawing at the very end because it doesn't fit. So by creating large, loose shapes in our sketch phase, we can see that Rexzilla is going to fit on our paper. So now we're going to go back to the top of his head, and we're going to draw the side of a diamond, or 3 sides of a square, as you're seeing in this drawing here. Okay. And now we're going to draw the top of his nose. So as I explained in past lessons, there's only 3 lines that you really need to know to draw anything. You need to know a straight line, you need to know a C curve, and you need to know an S curve. So remember, as I'm going through this drawing lesson, I'm going to reference these 3 types of lines to help guide you to creating Rexzilla. So the top of his nose is a C curve, and this ends up being the top portion of that R that we created in step number 1. Okay. Now one of the most difficult lines to draw is the S curve. So I'm going to take you step by step on how to create this S curve using the inside of Rex's mouth. Remember, he's looking up, his mouth is open, and we want to be able to capture that angle. And how we do that is we draw an S curve from the corner of his mouth, which I'm making a dot on one spot, and then I'm going to draw another dot toward the front of his mouth. And we're going to play connect the dots, drawing an S curve. So we're going to start drawing this S curve, and notice how I'm connecting the 2 dots using the S curve. That's the under portion of his mouth and his lips. Next, we're going to draw a C curve. Now the C curve is going to line up on the corner of his mouth. It's going to curve down, and that's going to create the inside of his mouth because his mouth is wide open. So this is a C curve drawing the bottom jaw for Rexzilla. Now Rex has tiny little arms. He's a Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? So he has small little arms. So the first thing we're going to draw is a C curve, and this C curve is going to be his shoulder. Now draw a straight line down and a straight line over, making a backwards L. And that's going to be basically the skeleton or the lines that guide us in drawing his arm position. Remember, what we do to one side, we want to do to the other side for symmetry. So now, notice a C curve poking out on the other side of Rex's body. And then we're going to draw his other arm with a straight line going off to the left-hand side of our paper. Now you'll notice that my arms aren't perfectly straight. They're not parallel. Okay, and that creates a very boring drawing. So you'll notice one arm is straight, the other one's slightly angled down, so we create a nice silhouette of this character. Okay, now we're going to go back and we're going to draw his forearms. Now we all know that our forearms are typically thinner than our upper arm, so this forearm is going to create a cone shape, thinner at the wrist, larger at the top of the forearm, and we're going to do this on both sides of the character. Okay. Now the next step, we have his arms in place. Now let's go back and we're going to add some more detail. We're going to go back to the head and we're going to start drawing his eyes. Now Rex from Toy Story, does he have large eyes or small eyes? He has small eyes, right? So we're going to draw these small eyes here. We're going to give him a little bit of an angry look. So let's angle his brow down a little bit. We're going to use a C curve for the bottom of his eye. And we can add in a little pupil. Now let's use an oval to draw on his nose, his nostril. Okay, so now we have his nostril. And then we're going to move down to his feet. So using a straight line, we're going to draw that back leg, creating his middle toe. Rex has 3 toes, so we're going to draw that middle toe there, seeing how that extends out from that initial triangle shape. And now we're going to go back to his front foot. And this is something, again, that, as a kid, I was always drawing feet from a profile view. It was always really difficult to draw that foot coming right at me. And so as we draw Rex's foot, notice how I draw a line across, which is what separates the top of his foot from his toes. And then I'm going to draw 3 lines. And these lines are going to follow the contour of that cone that we made for the initial shape of his foot. Okay, now in between, we're going to draw the letter V 3 times to make each individual toe, which is also going to represent his claws. Now let's go back to Rexzilla's tail. Each one of these scales or spikes on the back of his tail has a purpose. Now in Godzilla, the ones toward his middle to lower back are much larger. So if we're going to make Rexzilla, let's mimic that from Godzilla, and let's make this larger triangle toward the middle to lower part of his back, the largest triangle along his spine. Everything else is going to be about the same triangle size, gradually getting smaller as we get closer to the end of his tail. Now take special note, his tail is curving around. Notice how the tip of his tail is coming back toward his front foot. So we want to capture that with his spikes. So when you get to the farthest part of the curve, stop drawing your triangle right there. And now watch what I do. I start drawing a triangle at the tip of his tail, but I'm drawing it on the inside of the line rather than the outside of the line. And I'm working my way back up his tail. So the upper part of his tail, you're going to draw the triangles on the outside of the line. The lower part of his tail, the lower half, you're going to draw those spikes on the inside of the tail. And that gives that illusion that the tail is actually curving toward you. Now, speaking of spikes, we got to give him some teeth. So now we're going to go back up to the top of his head. Let's draw in the teeth. Now, don't get sloppy with putting in the teeth. Take your time in putting each one. Now, if you want to give him teeth like Rex, make them nice and soft and round, innocent. If you want to make them more like Godzilla, give him those sharp teeth. So remember, when you get to the edge of his mouth, start drawing the teeth on the outside. Okay, notice how I'm doing it right here. Same thing for the bottom jaw. Now inside of our mouth is our tongue, so let's use some C curves to create the tongue. Now we're going to go to his hands and his toes again, and we're going to finish the claws on Rexzilla. So the claws are very much like a slice of pizza or a piece of candy corn. Notice I'm using a C curve and a couple straight lines to create that claw shape. Okay, so now we look over our Rexzilla. We see that all the shapes look good proportions. Now this is probably the most fun in the drawing. When you know your shapes are right, you can add all the little details. You can add every little scale of Rexzilla that you want, but you got to get the big shapes right first. So now I'm going to go back, and as a design rule, you always want to use odd numbers. So notice in Rex how I'm drawing his spots on his skin, and I'm doing it in groups of 3. So draw groups of 3 and mix up the sizes. Some large, some small, but keep them in a cluster of about 3. And I'll do this all over his body in different areas that seem that we can add some detail. Maybe it's a little plain. Like on his thigh here, we'll add some ovals in groups of 3. Okay. Now the very last part is adding the last minute details. And this is something that we can do in our inking step, but I'll show you a little bit by what I mean here. Rex is a toy. So in order for his neck to move and his tail to move, you have to have pivot points. So notice how I draw this line around his neck to give him that feeling of still being a toy, and around his tail. You'll also notice that as toys, look very closely, go and grab one of your toys and look very closely at how the sides, the front and back of your toy, or the sides of your toy have a seam where the toy gets assembled together. So even in the sketch phase, you can add the tiniest details like the seams of this toy. And when you're drawing the seam, think center line. How does this seam follow the contour of his body, the contour of his thigh, the contour of his foot? And all of those elements and those details just add to the believability and the aesthetic beauty of your drawing. Now let's go to step 4. Step 4 is cleanup or inking. You notice I always start with the eyes. So I'm going to give him a thicker eyelid, add his pupils in there. And in the inking step, the most important thing in inking is your line quality. You took your time sketching your character out, you drew freely and loosely, you got the drawing just the way you want it. And remember, if you're going to use a marker, you can't erase, or you're going to be using a lot of whiteout. So use a number 2 pencil to work on your line quality. Try to get nice, smooth, clean lines as you're going over the outer edge of his nose and down his neck. Another great practice, not just in line quality, but in line thickness. Now the silhouette, the main silhouette of Rexzilla is going to be slightly thicker than the details that we're creating inside of him, like the spots or his scales or wrinkles or his teeth. We want to emphasize the silhouette of Rexzilla. So in order to do that, we're going to make the outer edge a little bit darker, and that's really going to make his pose stand out. Anything on the inside of the drawing will tend to have a thinner line, like his teeth, his scales, his spots, his wrinkles, all those things. We don't want to take away from the main action or the main pose in this silhouette. The last thing I want to reinforce in the cleanup step or the inking step is, again, just take your time. You spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about this character, sketching it out just the way you want it. Don't rush through this part of the process. Take your time in inking and cleaning up all the beautiful lines that you created. Okay, now step 5 is to have fun in color. Remember, take your time again with coloring. You don't want to put all this work into your drawing only to have sloppy coloring. So take your time, fill in all the white spaces if you're using colored pencils or markers. I also recommend that when you're coloring, just like when you were sketching, start lightly. Don't press too hard with the colored pencils or the markers right away. Start with a lighter line, and then you can build up that to create things like shadows and highlights to give your final drawing a more 3D effect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to watch the step-by-step drawing tutorial of Rexzilla. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Hope you got something out of it, even if it was a nugget or two of information that you didn't know before. Stay tuned, because next week we're going to have another step-by-step drawing tutorial, just like we will every week. And until next time, remember your ABCs. Always be creating. We'll see you next time. I haven't had dinner yet, and I'm getting hungry.